What's up, race fans? It's March 2019, and you're talking dirty with Jake. I'm your host, Jake. So I'm recording this on Friday, March 22nd, the day before the OCFS Motorsports Show, our annual car show that we hold inside the arena building. This year's show is special, being that, this is the 100th year celebration. We really had to do it big, and we're going to have a number of very special guests and vehicles on display. In addition to our annual Ms. OCFS pageant and Little Miss OCFS pageant. You say OCFS so much, you think you can just do it without tripping it up, but sometimes it just happens that way. Anyway, the show's going to be huge this year. Brett Hearn's got his car in the show for the first time in a while. He's going to make an appearance Saturday night. We have NASCAR Xfinity driver David Starr, who's going to be there to do a Q&A Saturday night. We have some ARCA cars on display. Stuart Friesen's number 52 Chevy Silverado from his rookie season will be on display. I think it was a race-used vehicle in Martinsville, believe it or not, which happens to be the same weekend as our show. And I might be wrong. You'll see when you go to the show. It has a sticker. It'll tell you where they raced it. Anyway, show is going to be huge. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to be set up with my microphone. I'm going to be talking to fans. I'm going to be distributing stickers, those really cool old vintage slide decal recreations. We had them made into stickers. So just have a quick chat with me. I'm going to ask fans, silly questions about their favorite memories and favorite drivers, their predictions, whatever. Just come say hi and you'll get a sticker. And, in addition to all that cool stuff, there's also some charity events. We still have an interview this week. I had a nice little sit down with Joe Romer. He's one of these guys who has a really cool history with the track and a lot of interesting stories to tell. His father had won some features early in OCFS's history. In fact, he had won the first 100-lap feature. So I wanted to just kind of pick Joe's brain and get some interesting stories out of him. So let's just get right to that. Here we go. Hey, listeners, we're at the Orange County Fair Speedway offices today with my guest, Joe Romer. I'm not even really sure what title to give him, so I'll just pass it off. Joe, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So what would you call yourself? You were a driver at a time. You've been involved at the track in a number of ways, I guess. What's your earliest involvement?
My earliest involvement would have been coming here as a child, while my father was still driving. My mother was a scorer here. Probably the first time I was here, don't even have a memory of it because I was in a bassinet while she was scoring. But then people didn't worry about their ear protection back then. That didn't come until the later years while we were racing. Right. From then on, it just escalated. I hung out, watched the races. My father stopped racing in roughly 61, and that would have put me at about 9 years old, 9 years old, and then started coming to the races on my own to watch because all the drivers were my father's friends. You never knew on a Sunday morning who was going to be in the house when you woke up in the morning, sleeping on the floor or the couch. A lot of things stick out in my memory. I mean, things that really don't matter, like the little gentleman in the police hat that collected tickets going into the main grandstand. Till this day, at my age, I remember his name. His name was Mr. Vernoy. Wow. A little guy, and he always said hello to my mother and I, and it was different here then.
How long ago was that?
That would have been 57, wow. 8, 9, those years. So and you could walk out of the grandstand as a 6 or 7 year old and go to the bathroom and come back, and you didn't have to worry. It was a different world then.
Yeah. So your father is one of our earlier big stars, maybe, potentially. He's winner of the first 100-lap race that occurred at Orange County. In what year was that? 1956, was it?
You'll have to ask our friend
Yeah,
Doug
this
here.
is a Doug Dulgarian question. He's got the records. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about your father and his career in racing and what he, kind of the era that he was involved in the cars of that time. And
Well, he was involved here in the early years of when they were starting to get into the V8, and it was a situation where he had a few cars that he owned himself. He had driven for other people. We have a great book called The Hard Clay, 50 Years on the Hard Clay, from 1919 to 1969. And there's some pictures in there of him climbing out of a vehicle that's up on top of a pile or upside down. He drove Ben Davis's number 18 for a while. One of his best rides probably was the number 46 that was owned by Dalbert Brothers Construction out of Warwick. And they were all a bunch of Dutchmen, and Dad was a Dutchman, so they all got along and drank a lot. And they had some good outings with that car. Ray Brown also drove that car for a while. But he drove the 7, which was his own car. Drove a couple different cars. But he, according to the newspaper clipping I have buried somewhere, he was the first driver who resided in Middletown to win a feature at Victory Speedway.
yes, according to the Auto Racing Research Associates website, who, by the way, these guys are compiling race records from as far back as they can, and they've done an incredible job of documenting OCFS's records here. And so according to the records, right, Joe Romer was the winner in a 1949 race in a car owned by Ben Davis.
That was number 18.
Yes, number 8, and I actually have that right here. Yep, they have the car number. And then again, as I mentioned before, he was the first winner, or the first 100-lap race winner at Orange County, and that occurred in 1952 in the number 46 car.
That would have been Dalbert Brothers' car. I think it was 1951 or 2. Red Rooster was a bar that a lot of the drivers frequented after the races, and it was very friendly to the race crowd. So my father walked in one night during the week, and the owner happened to be my godfather. And he says, later on, of course, because this is before I was born, and he asked my father if he was racing, and my father said, no, it's a different kind of a car, Willie. And Willie says, what kind of car you need? He said, well, it has to be a new car. It's a big car, a new car. It's not a stock car. He said, you have a car? No. He says, take my car. Willie, I can't take your car because it'd be junk. You have to knock the windows out, and you can't have any windows in it. Doors have to be chained shut. And Willie didn't say a word. He came out from behind the bar, walked outside with a hammer in his hand, and commenced to knock the windows out of the car. Walked back inside, says, now you got a car. And that car was a 49 Ford, or a 49 Mercury rather, and that car won that race, that championship race. And that was the picture I just showed you of him standing there.
Oh, that was the car in the picture, the X car.
No, the
okay,
other one
another
with some of the old timers,
Yep.
the track owner, Eno Van Dam, another promoter from down the south, which was Bob Lowry. Even our illustrious beer salesman from the bleachers, Jumbo Monaco, is even in that picture. But they were all friends then. It was a smaller group of people. Intermissions, all the drivers went up to the beer stand. They didn't drink, but they went up to the beer stand. They met with the families, and it was a half hour, an hour of chit-chat, and they went back down into the pits to run a race. It was different then. I mean, but how many cars did you have? Not as many as we do today. The program was one field of cars.
Yeah.
There wasn't modified. There wasn't 358. There wasn't small block modified. There wasn't street stock. That was it.
What were car counts like back then?
When I started coming, is what I can remember. I'm going to take a wild guess just from a kid's memory. I'd say maybe in the 25 to 30 range.
Oh.
And that was your whole night's program.
The pits must have looked bare, huh?
Oh, they did. And in the pits, there was also another racetrack.
Right.
There was a midget track,
Yep.
a quarter-mile midget track, not quite a full quarter inside the track.
Was that dirt or blacktop?
That I know of, it was blacktop. But for a while, I heard that it was dirt. And in fact, I heard that it was dirt when Tex Enright ran a midget. Now, Tex being our awesome flag starter.
Yeah. I'm looking at this list from the ARA here and just seeing, some of the names around your father's name. You just said Tex Enright, Russ Dodd, you've got Frankie Schneider, Ray Brown, Bud Marl. These are some of the names that even somebody, even like a young guy like me, we know about, the history of these guys and their significance to the track. So you grew up around these guys. And
yeah, they were all like uncles. Everybody took everybody in. Now, you grew up around Pine Bush.
Yes.
I'll tell you a funny story. Bud Marl owned and ran his own, the 03, which for whatever reason, I don't know, Dad drove the 03 for Bud for a while. I was hunting in Walker Valley on the mountain. And I walked up and just stopped to lean on a tree. And I looked up, and it was a wooden plaque nailed to the tree. And it said, "In memory of Bud Marl."
Interesting.
He loved these woods like he loved life itself.
So is Marl Road in Walker Valley named for him?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
They
so
also own
I grew
Marl
up
Motors.
off of Marl Road. I grew up on off of one of the side roads off of Marl Road.
Which one?
Gosh, I can't even remember.
Well, I think
there was Bog to the left, and I was the next one off the right.
Yeah, when you go up,
I can't remember the name of the road. It was my father's house.
It would be halfway up the mountain on the way up towards Craigsmore.
Yep.
And went into the right, and that's where I found that plaque. And now, what are the chances of me?
It's the same woods that I've hunted those woods myself. It was where I took my first deer in those woods when I was 15.
What are the chances of me walking up, leaning on a tree, and looking up and seeing that sign?
That's incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
It's really strange. But, all those people, they were bigger than life to me. My hero out of that group would have been Sonny Strupp.
Yeah.
Sonny was a younger man then. He's probably just about Dad's age, a little younger. And it was normal for him to come up out of the pits and grab me and throw me up on top of his shoulders and stand there and drink a soda, me sitting on his shoulders. And later on, when Dad wasn't coming to the races anymore, and I came, I would always go over and see Sonny and hang out by him a little bit. And I started racing. And one of my favorite pictures, and I have it in there, is Sonny Strupp running a heat race in Charlie Sanders number 4. And me running against him in a heat race. And I don't remember whether I won it and he was second or he won it and I was second. And afterwards he came over and said, "What were you trying to do? Beat me?" And just before Sonny died, I brought that with me to Nostalgia Night, that picture, and I had him sign it for me.
Wow. Wow. What are some of I like that story about the new car. That's pretty cool. Anything else in that vein? Any of these kind of hidden weird stories, Red Rooster stories? Anything that kind of sticks out still in your memory after all this time as like a great moment in Orange County history?
If you follow Wisner out to where it comes out by Jervik Paint, and look to the right, there's an open lot there now. That used to be owned by my uncle, my father's sister's husband. His name was Everett Heater. And Everett was one heck of a mechanic back then. You didn't go and buy a $30,000 motor. You built it. And what you built, you had to race. You went and bought an Iskandarian cam, or you did whatever you did to make it run. And you wanted it to run better than everybody else's. Mm-hmm. And there was times, only being that close, where they'd be late putting the car together. And they'd fire the car up and drive it over to the track.
Yeah, why not?
It's only not even a quarter of a mile. And I grew up in their yard, watching them take it apart and put it back together, and I had no idea what I was doing. I always wanted to sit in the car, and I used to catch heck all the time because I'd always want to pick up the helmet and goggles. Dad would go to put them on, and they'd be all scratched up, so he had to always hide them from me. But I was a little kid.
Yeah.
This track has so much history. It goes back so far, and the people that were here, it was a different crowd base, spectator base. Mm-hmm. There was nothing else to do. There was no malls. There was Saturday night, any kid from any local school was here because it was the only thing going on.
Right.
And it was a social interaction. The people, they made it.
Yeah.
The drivers were bigger than life. They were all heroes. I had been involved in drag racing for a while in the early 70s. And in 1975, I decided I was going to open my own shop. Mm-hmm. I was 22 years old, and I decided to open a shop. That's when I met Doug, and I stopped drag racing. And in 1976, he convinced me to go try circle racing. It was more local. And really, I loved it better. There was more bang for your buck. Mm-hmm. But what helped me a lot is I never had a weak motor because I learned a lot in the drag racing field that I was able to put in to the circle car.
Yeah.
And it gave me a little bit of an edge. For a long time, all the cars had something called vacupan. It was a system to evacuate crankcase pressure out of the crankcase.
Okay.
And they used, for drag racing, a little valve that went into the header on an angle and created a vacuum, which went into a filter on top of the valve cover. Worked great for drag racing. I decided I was going to do it for circle racing. It worked, but I was the first one to do it, so I made a mistake. In drag racing, you put one in each valve cover.
Uh-huh.
You can't do that circle racing because the right-hand valve cover fills up with oil.
Oh.
So hence, I was dusting for mosquitoes with oil. And that's where some of my good buddies gave me a nickname for a while, Smokin' Joe. And then the following week, we came back with both of the breathers in the left-hand valve cover, and that solved that. But that was an innovation that no one else here had used.
And now, is that something that people continued to do after you?
Yes, for a long, long time. I think now, are they still using it, Doug, or are they using electric?
No, I don't believe they're using
I don't think they use them anymore. But it was the only way to keep oil in the engine because back then the compression ratio was so high, it built crankcase pressure and it would leak out of all the seals.
Interesting.
And that was how we got around that. Then I decided around, I think it was 81, 80 or 81 to try something new. A hood scoop, a ram air scoop. I did it. And then wasn't long, it worked. You had to change jets, made a little more power. Then I found, I saw somebody else was using it after they had seen it, which was Glenn Fitzcharles. He was using that. And the following year, just like anything else that's an edge or good or an innovation, it was outlawed.
Right.
So,
that's interesting.
no front opening hood scoops.
Huh.
So, and it was a good thing, but
Where
it was
would it
hard
open to if it didn't open to the front?
the sides or the back.
Yeah, okay.
But when it was open to the front, you were forcing air in.
Right.
It was a problem, though, because you had all the mud and marbles going inside, so you had to develop a filter system with tiers in it so that it separated. It was a mud separator, so to speak. But then I finally got it working. They outlawed it.
Interesting. That's I've gotten to talk a lot with Gary Ballou about his various innovations and how
Brilliant man.
yeah, it's always really neat to hear about the technology and the fact that it just came from regular guys and drivers and not like engineers at GM or these were just the guys getting dirty and trying new things and
looking at those things and seeing them and just looking at a car and sitting there and let me try this and try that. That's where innovations came from. When I first started racing here, probably around the 76, 77, that area, my dad would come down here with me once in a while. And there was always somebody that he would introduce me to. And I was oblivious. I had no idea who these people were. If you look on that sheet right there, you'll probably see the name of Spud Murphy.
I did notice a Spud somewhere. I thought that was an interesting.
Billy Bachman, which is my good friend Bobby Bachman's father. Mm-hmm. He came walking over in his green work uniforms, and Dad introduced me to him. I had no idea he ran with Dad because there was that time lapse in between.
Right.
Guy came over and stood on my back of my flatbed watching the races, talking to my dad. He introduced him to me, Jim Shaw. But he never told me that Jim Shaw was half of J&J Balancers, which you'll see on the hood of every Ferriola car. Mm-hmm. They're from down in Jersey at Gasoline Alley. I mean, all these people, they were just people. Dad talked to them like they were people, introduced me to them. Okay. I'll never forget, though, Spud Murphy shook my hand, and it was like putting my hand into a baseball glove. That man had the biggest hands I ever saw in my life.
How'd he fit into the race car? He must have been a big guy.
He was a pretty big guy.
I always wondered, as a very tall man myself, I look at race cars and I think there's no way you'd shove my ass into that thing. But
And the funny part about it sometimes the newer cars is terribly hard to get in, but once you're in,
it's comfortable.
It's the most comfortable feeling.
You feel totally surrounded and comforted by it, right? It's
you
like
don't
hugging,
feel enclosed. What you feel is safe. You feel protected.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know just in general, modern car tech, I mean, it's like it's so insane how safe it's gotten. I mean, you watch a NASCAR race, you watch these sprint cars tumble 5-6 times over, and, a guy gets right out of it, and you think, like, holy shit, how do you... Oh, here we go. I'm breaking my own rules. I'm cursing on my own podcast.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Makes me feel better if I do it.
Yeah, we'll bleep them.
But anyway, these people that you look there, I mean, they were the beginning. They were the heroes. They started this. That's why for a while it looked like the Speedway may give up and roll over like all the other Speedways did. And that's why it's the greatest thing. It's getting a second breath of life right now. Halmar has done amazing wonders, and maybe we'll make this into what it really deserves to be, a premier racetrack. It's definitely on the right track.
So are you still a regular attendee at events?
Whenever I can.
Yeah.
I work a lot, but whenever I can. I'm going to be here a little more this year. I've been asked to give somebody a hand, so I will. An old friend of mine's son, which they'll all figure that out when we get down there. But we've, over the years, it's a sacrifice to run every week and run multiple tracks. Like I said, Doug was instrumental in getting me started, and there were times that we had to really give up everything. You didn't go out with your friends and have a beer. We had to be at the car working. There were some all-nighters where we put a car together. We pick up a frame on a Thursday, a bare frame. It's not like today where they all bolted together like an erector set. You had to buy it, get it home, make brackets, weld brackets on, make things fit, put the body on. And one car we put together, which was a Bobby Malzahn car from Newton Speed, we picked it up on Thursday, and We stayed at the garage from Thursday until we went to the track on Saturday. We allowed people to go home and take a shower, but they couldn't go by themselves, or they wouldn't have come back.
And fall asleep.
Yeah, but we stayed with it 3 days, and we put the car together. Listen, and Doug was there.
How'd you have enough energy to drive it?
I don't even remember being here.
It was like a blur, huh?
It was.
Do you find you have a rebirth of interest in the speedway and racing in general since the advent of Nostalgia Night, when you get to hang out with all your old friends again? And
Absolutely. You know, Doug will never be able to get the accolades that he deserves for starting this. I mean, we've talked about things.
Well, that's not why I'm asking you that. I just enjoy seeing all you guys excited again.
You know what?
Doug's
yeah,
looking
you
for
do.
a
But
pat on the back.
it was your idea, your baby. But we had talked about it years before that. But you were the only one that buckled down and did all the work and made it happen. And do I think it? Oh, when I get down and see everybody, we're talking and like I said, Doug was responsible for me starting. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea. Doug and I said, well, who do I know that's running now that could give me some background information? And my friend Jeff Farber, we called him up, and Jeff said, yeah, okay, we'll look around. And Johnny Owens was getting rid of one of his cars. It was the old 12 Coupe. And Doug and I and Jeff went out and looked at it, and we purchased it. I don't even remember what we paid. We brought it home. And I know.
What's happening? Hey, oh my lord. You're early for the season.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah, no, we're not going to edit it out. Mike Gerda's here. Say hi, Mike.
Oh, I'm live. Hello, everybody.
How you doing, Mike?
Good. It's all good.
Yes,
for
it
the
is.
soda melt.
It's pretty cool when we record in the Orange County offices. You never know who's going to
You never
stop
know
by.
who's going to pop in. I got another room. I got my town supervisors here to discuss some stuff we're doing over the summer, so it should be good. All right.
Good seeing you.
Enjoy. Good seeing you, Jeff.
Anyway, we all went and took a look at this car and bought the car. Could hardly carry it, it was so heavy. I mean, the frame back then was like, it took 4 guys to move it. Now you can stand up in the middle of it and lift it off the ground. I mean, it's,
Yeah, you know, interestingly, my grandmother's boyfriend, a big car nut, right? And he had moved out of Pine Bush, and he had an old modified frame sitting in his garage. And I threw my back out picking it up with him. I mean, we had 4 guys, 2 on each end, and we lifted it and put it into the back of a truck. And I was hurting.
it's changed.
It was heavy.
It's changed. I mean, innovations have gone, just the technology today, it's unbelievable. But it's a situation where all of racing has changed.
Right.
But it's still here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about, the changes to racing, especially, we like to talk a lot about how NASCAR is boring and that you shouldn't bother with NASCAR. You should go to the dirt races at Orange County. But there are even detractors here, and and not that I want to call too much attention to it, but a lot of people miss the era of cars, with the unique bodies, and I know a lot of the people who've been with the sport for a long time find the modern bodies to be boring looking or too much of the same, or but really the innovations there. They move the sport forward. You're talking about safer cars. You're talking about faster times. You're talking, but what you lose is that charm and the nostalgia and the having all these neat different cars to look at when you go to the races. I mean, now you get it in terms of the design of the wrap or the lettering on the car, but that's, it's different.
What racing has lost, and you have to put regulations and boundaries, but what it's lost is the innovations that a driver, owner, team would think up and try. I mean, over the years, some of that stuff is really outrageous.
Yeah.
Some of it worked, some of it didn't. Now they're all rubber stamp cars.
Right.
I mean, you can pretty much, you bend a frame, you can go get a new frame, and almost everything off that frame will fit on a new frame. All the brackets, body, everything is just rubber stamp. It's different. But we've taken away the ability to be innovative, be the first one to try something. But you had to do it somehow, because now, but the only thing is, the bad part about that, is when you take that away from the layman, the lower price racer, now only the people with big money
Right.
get the most minute innovations that are inside. I'm looking at some of the motors. I've always built my own motors. They were good. I've had some really good drivers sit in my car and run it and say, that's got some snot. Stan Sherman, Billy Wilson, Stan Plosky, anybody ever sat in it? Well, a lot of that came from my years of what I learned in drag racing. Mm-hmm. But after a while, that surpassed me. Now,
Right.
it's way past that.
Right.
And there's big dollars in this stuff. And that's the only bad part. It's pushed a lot of people out of racing because they just could not be able to afford it anymore.
Right. So do you think your drag experience that had a direct correlation to your ability to produce like fast speeds and strong
Good
fast
motors.
Yeah.
Good motors. Yeah, that helped me in the beginning. You know, after a while, then you kind of used up that. And plus, some of the things that I knew and brought to the sport, other people were bringing to the sport too. Engine builders. Back then, you didn't go get an engine built. I mean, one of the first engine builders around here was Precision. Mm-hmm. I mean, he brought a lot to the table. Bob Wendland is a brilliant man, worked for Ford Motor Company, had a lot to do with the boss head. He worked with Jack Roush for the factory. So, I mean, he was a very brilliant man. What he brought to the table helped take the drag racing knowledge and surpass and go into the circle racing really changing as far as the motors. And then when you start putting more horsepower in the engines, I mean, when I started, the smell of a big block on injectors and alcohol, tremendous. Well, they took it away. You couldn't use alcohol. Then you had the alcohol carburetor, and then it went to gas only. And we won't get into the politics of why that happened or why we think that happened. But they made engines produce more power. And the more power you have, the more trouble you have getting it to the ground, getting it to hook up. So now you get it to hook up the way you start to work with horsepower and torque curves, so that horsepower and torque, you wanted, if you had good traction, good track, depends on where you were running too, depending on what the track was like. There was nights that a good small block out there could give a big block a run for its money because the track was dry, dusty, slick.
Right.
And that's why, I guess, from what I understand, there's a new rule this year: no more big small blocks.
Yeah, I think that actually happened either last year or the year before. Can't remember, but it's new within the last couple of years.
Yeah, somebody told me they call that the Creedon Rule.
It was inspired by Danny. Yeah, I believe that was 2017.
But that was innovations.
Yeah. Right.
Cubic inch.
Yeah.
Whether you put it into a Ford block, Pontiac block, GM block, it doesn't make a difference. Or it was a block.
Yeah.
Well, why did we not do that? Why do we say we can't use a big small block anymore? Well, because they were going the right direction,
Yeah.
but they put restrictions on it by making, if you lost the weight there, you had to put less weight in the car, more weight in the car, bigger motor. It's hard for me to even keep up with anymore.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who's strictly a fan, never been a competitor or a team member in any capacity, a lot of this stuff's over my head. But
I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever gone to a shop, somebody's shop, and watched them set up a car for Saturday night?
Not from beginning to end. No. I've been to a number of people's shops and seen cars in progress.
Scaling?
But never spent more than, just to interview people. So once I was in, I did my interview and I got out of there. But so I've seen a small piece of it.
You need to go to somebody's shop, pick somebody, go and watch them prepare the car for the track. After the car is all together, just what you have to go through. And then when you get here, if it rained, or they decided to water the track more than normal, or the sun bakes it and they didn't water as much, now you have to adjust for what you thought the track was going to be like.
Right.
And that's where you find your drivers that can read a track really flourish. Nobody ever read this track, ever, from in my years of racing, better than Brett Hearn and Gary Ballou. And they both can read a track. And they would read it and adjust for it before they ever got here. They'd unload the car off the trailer and it was perfect. Me, forget it.
Just get in it and go, huh? See what
Yeah.
you do as good as you can.
Yeah, I've seen it happen with the Ferriola cars, whether Gary was driving, Billy Osmond, they roll him off the truck. And that's when Whip Mulligan was working for him. Whip, that's another story. He was one of Dad's friends, and Whip was a brilliant, brilliant man. Quite a character. Very, very colorful. Eastern States, 1978. I still had a small block, and I was thinking about graduating and trying to run a big block. Not because I thought I was good enough, but because monetarily you made a little more money for qualifying.
Right. And this was when a small block would have been considered a sportsman, right?
Yes, Sportsman, 320.
Yeah.
320 cubic inch. And big block was 467. Alcohol and injectors. So, Dougie, my mentor, we're standing down by the concession stand, and he says, "There's Whip Mulligan. Why don't you ask him if he's building any cars this winter?" So I walked over to him. I said, "Whip, how you doing?" "Okay." I said, "I'm Joe Romer." "Oh, okay." I said, "Are you building any cars this winter?" "I don't know for sure." "Are you interested?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Give me your phone number." And he did. I gave him my number, and I got a call in the end of December. And he says, "Are you still looking to have me build a car?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay." And that year was 1979, it was my first year modified. He made me run a carburetor. He would not allow me to run injectors. He said, "You're going to have enough trouble learning how to control this. So you don't argue with a guy that's helping you."
Yeah.
And he built a car for Harry Barrett, Larry Brolsma, another one for Kevin Collins, and myself. And I believe Kevin Collins worked with him that winter down in Columbia, New Jersey, on building those cars. And it was a good car. It was a real good car. And I got to spend some time with some wonderful people through my association with Whip. Of course, what prompted it was the friendship with my father to begin with. And then I got to be introduced to Richard Marinelli. And Richard was an awesome guy. But those two brains together were just phenomenal. I mean, and Gary drove the M1 for Richard.
Yep.
And I had the opportunity to be parked next to them, and Whip standing on my trailer, and Gary running for Richard, and being out on the track with him, and those guys conspiring to have Gary play with me out on the track to teach me. So, I mean, these things all happened. Before that, Bobby Malzahn was very, very good to me when he built the Newton Speed cars. That car ran 77, 78. It was a small block car. And Bobby was very helpful, gave me information, helped me figure out what was wrong with it. Got to spend some time later on the track with Bobby when I went modified. Interesting story. We're running a race for a heat for Eastern States. And Bobby's bumping me. And I'm ahead of him, and okay. Afterwards, I says, "Bobby," I had a push. I said, "Bobby, what were you doing?" He said, "Joe, I was trying to get you moving." I only kept you going straight. I could have turned you, but he said, I kept you going straight. You finished in front of me, didn't you?
Wow.
And that was the way they taught you. Mm-hmm. And, I was a kid learning, growing up.
Wow.
Bobby was a wonderful guy.
And incredible that they would help like that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's...
And we'd leave the pits, and we'd leave there and go to the 31st lap. We all met there like a big, huge family. Sometimes even brothers didn't get along. There'd be a fight outside, but we'd all meet there, and from there we'd go to Eddie Davis's place. We'd go to pit stop, and from there to the diner. And we usually walk out of the diner with the sun coming up. At that time, Chef Barber's dad owned the diner. So we'd kind of get a little crazy in there.
Which diner was this?
Colonial.
Okay, Colonial. Everybody now goes to Americana after the
That's because it's
races.
closer.
Yeah.
But
they can fit the haulers there a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, but we all went there, and we'd come out of there at daylight, and then you'd get a few hours sleep, a shower, go to work on a car, and you were going to Nazareth that night.
Mm.
So I even spent a little bit of time going to Nazareth with Bobby when he told me to leave my car home until I got used to Middletown, and I'd go down and try to help him out, change tires, wrench for him a little bit down there.
So you'd run Middletown on no sleep, and then go run Nazareth on even less sleep.
Yeah. In 77, 78, with a small block car, I was running Reading. Reading came up with a new class, a small block modified. They were the innovators who said, the very first time anybody called it a small block modified.
Oh, okay.
And they ran big blocks and small blocks, Friday and Sunday night. So down there, what they would do is use the same car and swap motors between Friday night and Sunday night.
Oh, wow.
But the pay was the same.
Huh.
They paid the same pay schedule. So there was two modified divisions running. Only one used a small block, one used a big block. But they put some regulations on the motors. Mm-hmm. You weren't allowed to do any head work.
On a small block.
On a small block. You couldn't port and polish. It had to be, a cast iron head with this number, and it couldn't have any larger ports. I built a pretty good motor for going down there, and we'd run there on with the small block, and then later I was invited to come down and run with the big blocks. And I'm like, I don't have a big block. They said, you get in an early heat, you qualify, you made more money than you made winning in Middletown.
Yeah.
So it was Friday night, drive to Reading. Lindy Vicari was a wonderful promoter, gave us motel rooms. We stayed, got up Saturday, came back to my shop, unloaded the car, went through the car, changed it over to Middletown specs, run Middletown, end up in the diner till daylight, go back to the shop Sunday morning, get the car ready, and leave Sunday afternoon for a Sunday evening show.
And you're changing motors again on Sunday.
No, I didn't change motors.
Okay.
I was running a small block with a big block.
You were running small blocks.
They were changing them down there. That was what they did because they didn't run on Saturday.
Right.
Unless you were a upper echelon car where you had multiple cars.
Right.
Nobody had multiple cars back then.
Yeah.
You're lucky you had one.
Wow.
And and I got to meet some wonderful people down there. The very first time I went out there for warm-ups, I pulled in, and remember, I'm young. I don't know any of these guys.
Right.
And some guy comes over and leans on the side of the car and pokes his head and he says, "What do you think of our cow pasture?" I'll never forget that. And if you're here for Nostalgia Night this year, if Gerald Chamberlain's here, I'll take you over and I'm going to remind him of it.
Wow.
And from there, it escalated. You met other people.
Pretty sure Doug told me just a day or two ago that Gerald was going to be there.
Well,
can't make any promises, but I think
if he shows,
I think that could happen.
If he shows, it's going to be quite a few years later. I'm going to walk over and ask him if he remembers that, and he probably does. I met a lot of wonderful people down there.
Mm. Oh, and that's what's so cool about Nostalgia Night. I mean, I know we talked a little about that already, but
wonderful.
Just the fact that you can, as a young fan like myself, you can watch these guys reconnect with each other and talk about old stories, and you could just sit there and watch and listen and just hear these guys go at it, and it's a pretty cool experience.
Oh, every year, my good friend Red Muir, I always break his chops because ran a heat race, won the heat race. Red was behind me. Checkered flag came down. He didn't see it, so he drove across the front of my hood and took the carburetor off. Oh. So that was the end. We were qualified, but That was the end of racing for that night.
Right.
And I always remind him of it, and we have a lot of fun back and forth over stuff like that.
Wow.
It's just one of the things that happened during racing.
So we're coming up on an hour here. So I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna ask you 2 last questions here. One, who are you pulling for this year? If you don't mind saying.
Well, I ran go-karts for a while, and Brett and that's where I met him.
Yep.
And he's been a very close friend of mine for many, many years and still is. So I'm always pulling for him when he's out there.
Yeah.
And I'll usually walk over and he'll give me a nod and let me know what's going on, whether the car is right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm going to throw something out there and maybe get in trouble for this.
Well.
But I like clean drivers.
Yeah.
I like the fact that when I was on a track, I could be next to someone and have them give you racing room and race them, not lean on them. Accidents do happen out there. You do go in a little too hard and bump somebody, and usually, but Brett was one of the guys you could always race with. There was a lot of guys here that you could do that. Gary was. There was a lot of guys that you could expect if you were in front of them at the end of the last lap of the heat, they were going to shove you out of the way before you got the checker flag. And I'm not afraid to say it. I was very close friends growing up with Rusty Creedon. He drove the 16X. That's Danny's dad.
Yeah.
And had some conversations with Danny last year and hung out over there a little bit. And he's pretty much asked me to come and help him out. So I'm going to go give him a little bit of a hand, whatever I can.
Great.
Whenever I have time. So being that I'm going to be helping him, I guess I'm going to have to pull for him too, huh?
Yeah. Now maybe you can tell me why, because I don't know Dan all that well. But how is it that he's managed to kind of paint himself as a controversial figure in Orange
Because
County?
he is. He's very hot-tempered.
Yeah.
He has a lot of driving ability. And he can get mad at me when he hears this, but we talked about this a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Outside the 31st lap one night. And he was not in a real good mood. Something had happened. And it's kind of funny because you're watching the race and you see other people do things wrong, but nobody ever mentions that.
Right.
So once you become the controversial figure,
Every little thing you do.
your microscope is on you.
Yep.
And I said to him, Danny, it's like a boxer. If a boxer gets emotional, he can't box effectively. He loses his focus.
Yeah.
You have to leave emotions out of it, and you got to concentrate on, the driving aspect. There will be other races. That's something Frankie Snyder told me a long, long time ago. He said, Joe, if you're 5th or 2nd, don't wreck the car trying to be 4th or 1st, because then you're going to be fixing the car.
Yeah.
Get what the car will give you and make it better for the following week. It taught me something.
And that's coming from Frankie Schneider. So
Yeah.
Anybody happens to be listening, I would take that as solid advice.
Oh, yeah. and actually, Danny had an excellent year this year. He, I guess, kept his temper, and he had a great year.
Yeah, I don't recall there being any talked about moments for Danny in 2018.
No.
Yeah.
Just a few things that he was irritated about, but he handled it differently.
I'd like to have him on the show at some point. I think it would be really
I
cool
don't know. I don't know about that.
I think it'd be cool to talk about some of this stuff. I mean, I think part of any sport and any, the idea of kind of choosing somebody to root against is just as exciting as somebody to root for.
It's always that way. You got to have somebody in a black hat.
Right, and I appreciate guys like Danny and Brett, and for a lot of the bigger names, obviously have as many detractors as they do fans, and I appreciate that these guys have such a good attitude about it, that they can still be diplomatic, they can still have good fan interactions, but still be regarded as some as kind of the bad guy or the.
I remember Gary saying to Brett one time when Brett was first starting out, and this was back in the early 70s, and he said, Brett, you'll know when you're getting good when they start to stop cheering, they start to boo you.
Yeah.
And that was because they were booing Gary at the time.
Right.
Now, I've raced with Gary. It was always clean.
Right.
We had a situation at Nazareth, 100 lapper. We were both doing pretty well. I think it was 4th and 5th, somewhere up there. And he was driving Marinelli's M1. And all of a sudden, going into one, I got blasted in the back. Spun me, backed me into the wall, and I hear this car screaming next to me. And Gary got the brunt of it. He hit the wall hard. He had come off of 4, throttle stuck. It happened a lot with injectors.
Oh, wow.
And he came over to me afterwards and asked me if I was okay. And that's when we really first started to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, I'm okay. And he said, I came off, and he said, I lifted and the throttle stuck. And it was either go through the wall or use you as a cushion.
Funny, I heard you say that in my head. I heard it in Gary's voice.
And he said, I had to use you for a cushion. And he said, I'm sorry if I screwed you up too much. I said, he started to walk away, and it was just, Gary Blue was talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I said, hey, Gary. And he stopped and turned around. He banged up his knees pretty good that night. And he turned around, and I said, if that ever happens again, use me again. And he smiled and walked away. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of him and I having whatever we have over friendship.
That's awesome. Well, if you can believe it, you've wasted almost another full hour of your time talking dirty with me, Jake. Hope you enjoyed it. That was our interview with Joe Romer, and I hope to see everybody at the Orange County Fair Speedway Motorsports Show this weekend, Saturday, March 23rd, and Sunday, March 24th. Bye.